The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. This is Brian from Breaking Down Security. This week is part 2 with our discussion with Dr. Catherine J. Ullman on incident response communications. We're going to go into some in-depth about talking about your audience, how you would tailor your reports or status in this case, depending on who you're talking to, and the depth that you would go into on things like how did this happen, or how, who was involved. We talked a little bit about where and when you should be placing blame, but also being able to explain what happened in such a way as to not alienate potential people who might have caused the issue. We also talk about how each level of the organization should be looking at the what, when, why, and how. And the process involved and how you got there, and ways that you might improve in the future. I also asked a question about incidents in terms of severity. So does a specific level of incident mean that your communication would scale accordingly? Would you involve the entire company in an email breach, or would you only mention certain groups, or what's involved there? And finally, we talk about the B-Sides that she is involved with, B-Sides Rochester, which has already occurred. Hope you've had a good time if you went to that. If you missed it, make sure you mark it on your calendar. We'll talk about when that is next year later on in the show. Hope you have a great week, and we'll go ahead and get started with our next question. When you're, obviously, we're talking about communication and methods of communication. When you're working with senior people as well, I think my question here, it says it's important to share necessary information with senior people and higher ups, but there's such a thing as oversharing. How do you toe the line between oversharing or nothing at all? Obviously you don't want to keep your senior people in the dark, but they don't need to know like uber technical stuff, right? Or does it really just depend on the organization?
Well, I think to a certain degree it depends on the org, but on the whole, your executive level folks, they don't know and they don't care. What I always say is, imagine 30 seconds in an elevator, right? You've got 30 seconds to get your message out. Now, it's all about knowing your audience and framing that discussion. So you shouldn't be talking to those folks for the very first time when you have an incident. Ideally, you know who they are, not just by name and by face, but you know something about them. You know what they find uncomfortable. Are they the sort of person that 30 seconds is it? That's all you're going to get. Or are they the kind of person that they really want to sit down because they want to understand the minutia? And there are some execs that want to know more. They still may not want to know things about IP addresses, but they may want to understand in a broader sense what happened. Whereas other executives are going to say, how does this impact the organization at the holistic level, right? How does this impact our reputation? How does this impact our product? How does this impact our bottom line? And for those folks, boy, keeping it short and sweet is really important. So I think part of it is knowing your audience, right? It's knowing whether that executive wants more or less. But I agree that most executives, I don't think are going to want, the gory details. They're going to want to understand how the bigger picture is going to be impacted.
Well, one gory detail that they pretty much always want to know is, how did this happen? Right? And
yes. But I don't think they want to know that Joe Schmo clicked a button. Like that's not necessarily the level of detail they want, though. Do you agree, Brian?
Well, I don't think they know what they want to know when it comes to how did this happen. Like if Joe clicked a button, I don't think that's a very good explanation of how that happened. Maybe it was, we didn't have this control in place, and that allowed Joe, right, to be able to click that button and get us compromised. Or it was a 0 day, we had no idea this was coming, right, and no one did, right, and
Right.
it's affecting everybody, things like that. It's
It,
hard to answer that question sometimes.
so one of the other things that I learned in my incident response class was that I think it's too early in the incident to actually start placing blame or to doing things like root cause, right? I mean, that should be done in the lessons learned. Right now, there's just a problem. So, instead of trying to point fingers and, maybe the person that caused the issue in the at the end is also going to help fix the issue because, they're the only ones who can do that. And if you start blaming them, then they're going to be like, I'm just not going to help out with this. I'm out, or something like that. It's good to chronicle that stuff for the communications later on in the lessons learned. But is there a way to not blame Joe, the intern, for the bad password? Or is there, how can you give a root cause during the engagement or the incident without necessarily giving a root cause? Because even the Solar Winds folks didn't know how they got into the system, I would imagine, until much, much later, until, hours or even days after. So how do you push that off and go, okay, look, we're not placing blame right now. We're not trying to figure out the root cause. We're just trying to shore up the defenses and use our controls to, mitigate or remove the risk.
So I think that the best thing to do is to make sure that the focus is placed in the right area, if that makes sense.
Right.
In other words, if somebody starts at, how does this happen? How did this happen? I would point out the fact that, do they really want to know how it happened right now? Or would they rather let us prevent this from being worse? Let's, I promise we will get as far to that answer as we can. We're not going to know that for a while. So, let's manage what we can manage right now. And I think it's about setting expectation, I guess, is kind of the point.
Right.
And that's tricky. But I think that's key, is that if you don't set that expectation, then ultimately, you're going to have a bunch of management that expects to know exactly what happened and who did it and what happened. And that's not realistic up front. And by the way, I would say the whole business with the intern, that's a fabulous example of really, really bad communication, right? Like blaming your intern, like seriously?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you got to be careful, because what if you're wrong? What if it wasn't the intern and you just told management, and then management, maybe they were confronted and under pressure and stressed out, and they mentioned that the intern did it and you were wrong.
Yeah.
So how's that going to look?
Management told Congress, I believe so that's another whole next level of not really knowing those things. But
attribution is really hard. It's not an easy thing. Occasionally you get lucky, right? And it's a slam dunk, but frequently it's a really, really difficult thing. And it's one of the last things that you wind up doing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the discussion, during the issue. How important is documentation? Because documentation and communication are going to go hand in hand here. We have to draft the press releases. We have to, massage that messaging. But once the engagement or once the incident has been called and there's no longer an incident, ideally, you're supposed to be doing a lessons learned or root cause analysis or something like that. What are some of the things that you should be documenting to be able to communicate better on the back end?
Everything. I know that sounds kind of crazy, right? I take notes as I go when I'm working, whether it's a small, I hate to call it, sort of nothing incident, right? Where there's no real ramification, but we find out there's a problem. I'm always jotting down notes. about sort of the basics that I can always go back to. And, no matter how you do that, you want to answer, it's basic journalism 101, who, what, where, when, how, and why, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to essentially try to be able to answer those questions when you're done. So as you're taking notes about what you're finding, if you have a partial answer to any of those questions, jot it down. And I'm always sort of thinking ahead about that. I mean, I don't do this, but you could make a template, I suppose, and you could, fill in the boxes as you go. Whatever mechanism works for you, but I definitely take notes, because at a minimum, I'm going to be writing a report, and I'm going to say, here's what I saw, and I may or may not make some claims based on what I saw. Because in some forensics cases, literally, all I'm doing is saying, I examined this system and here is what I saw, end of subject. In something like, an incident response like the exchange thing, or, we find out that, that there's been some sort of fraud that's happened, I have to translate what I've seen in a technical way to non-technical audience. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to answer who, what, where, when, how, and why. That's really what the goal is, because some portion of what I saw or what I did has to answer those questions.
And right. Each person as a part of that incident should do the same, because I can
Agreed.
envision multiple levels, like the situation manager told this person to do X, and then this person said, okay, in order to accomplish X, I need to do A, B, and C, and that might involve one or two other people. So those reports, screenshots, what you did, your evaluation, your conclusions all boil up to maybe even an executive filing an incident report, getting all these different reports at these different levels. It'll be less detailed as it goes up, but finally, somebody has to supply an incident report to either the press or to upper management or the board, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would also add that, so all of my reports start with how I was consulted. How did I get involved in this in the first place, right? Because like you were just saying, that sort of feeds back to the next level beyond that. So, we received an email from this department asking us to look into XYZ. Or I was made aware of this by my supervisor, so-and-so, and this is what I did, right? I was asked to do the following. And so that leads you back to the supervisor. And ideally, this supervisor, whoever did something, and maybe they went to 3 or 4 different people, and each of those have those reports. And like you said, it sort of can funnel all back together into one big story.
Right. And that's important no matter what level you're at. I mean, you may not be aware of the overall large incident, but your colleague told you, oh, go check out this firewall and look at the logs and see if you see anything from this particular domain. Right. And you have no idea why, but still do a report as to what you found, boil that back up, and that may help in the overall, incident.
Yeah, absolutely.
Itself. So Kathy, you'd mentioned taking notes. It's important for communications, and I didn't want to go backwards, but I'm going to have to go backwards because, we talked about status pages. We talked about methods of communication earlier. Would it make sense to say, okay, look, we're going to give you hourly briefings, or, this status page will update every 45 minutes with, new information, and hold people to that? Or, should every incident be treated the same way in that respect? Or can you go on and say, okay, well, this is only like a level 1 incident versus, something that's, oh my God level. Do you treat communication differently depending on how you initially, think about how the incident is? Oh, this is not a huge deal. We just didn't provision somebody off, or there's an insider threat or whatever. Do you ever scale your communication or your process there to what you believe that to be, or is everything the same?
I would say it's definitely context driven. So, not even incidents that I deal with specifically, but we might have an issue where a service is unavailable and our teams are required to put out a status update periodically, and it typically says there will be an update if there's been a change by this time, but the time window and all the details kind of vary based on the particulars, right? So let's say it's an outage because our ISP is down. Well, we can't give an update more often than we get it ourselves, right? So if you're dealing with a third party, you may be limited as to how often you can update because you just don't have that information. So I think it's going to be context. It's really going to be context driven. If it's something smaller, if it's not impacting a large piece of your organization, you may not need to do updates or communicate as much. And if it's not something where people are going to be getting phone calls from the newspaper, that makes a big difference. Then, right. Suddenly your employees are getting phone calls and they're getting questions, and where you need to kind of get ahead of it.
Right. Yeah, I guess that makes sense because, you just mentioned here what happens if I just saw an interesting tweet list from TinkerSec. He was doing Nmap on the internet and found some, cameras on somebody's, network. And, there's 20 or 30 different posts of him going through this thing. And he's like, oh crap, I found this stuff. Somebody needs to be notified. If that was the company, now that's been splattered all over Twitter, names weren't mentioned, but just the camera type. How important is it to tell employees, should you have a communication policy or procedures like, okay, we're in the middle of an incident. So if, and it's been leaked to the press. So, hey, help desk person, refer them to somebody, not the incident commander, but maybe your communications team or social media. When would you put those things out? Or is that just something that an organization should know about and know how to do? Is that something you should put in the annual training that you put out, or, how would that work for your org?
Well, I think specifically for us, it's going to be context driven, right? So if it's something that is becoming widespread, we're often asked, is there a problem? Do we know something's going on? Is there an issue? And communications will get involved if it's the kind of thing where we need to make a more formal announcement. Certainly, because I work for a state university, which is sort of a whole other universe unto itself, it's kind of like a small city. That makes a lot of this challenging. So people who are brought on understand their state employees, even the students who are brought on as student employees. So you can't make a statement for a state organization unless you have the official power to make said statement. And you can get into a lot of trouble if you do that. It works the same with vendors, right? Like, we're not allowed to talk to salespeople directly because that's not our job. We have people that talk to salespeople. We can reach out to an organization and say, we would like information about this product, but we can't talk about money. We can't talk about anything like that. Okay. Very similar with communication. We have very restricted rules about what we're allowed to talk about. On the one hand, we're a public institution. So, my information about who I am and what I do, generally speaking, is not a private thing. Which is why it's fairly easy for me to give talks and kind of be all over the place. But at the same time, I'm expected that I'm not going to talk about the details of what's going on in the organization at large, right? That's not something I'm at liberty to do. So, right. So it's been a very long time since I've been hired, and things have changed substantially. But I do know that even with our students, you do sign stuff that says you're a state employee and there are expectations about what you do and don't do. And communication certainly falls under that.
Oh, that's good to know. I didn't know that you had to, Do you have to go through a class or something to be a representative of the university? Or
No, you basically sign your life away that just said, you're just told during orientation at some point, or at least 21 years ago plus when I was hired, that's how they did it. And I know our students have to sign that because I've seen the document that they have to sign. But there is this expectation that, as a state employee, you cannot speak for the organization without proper authority. And like I said, it's the same for you can't speak, you can't buy, you can't order, you can't, there are these strict rules, and you are explicitly told all of that at the very beginning.
Right. Okay. Mr. Betcher, how about yourself? You work in very much a corporate environment, but you work in a specific industry that's, kind of cagey and prone to, having some incidents once in a while. What is communications policy like for y'all?
Well, at my level, you just don't do it, right? As far as outside the organization, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
At that lower level, right? At that low of a level, you just don't do it. And so, I've never had to worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I haven't either, because I've just, even without signing your life away in the beginning, you just, especially when you move into security, right? Like your role is going to involve things that other people are not allowed to know about, and you're not supposed to communicate. And really our university, probably more than a lot of others, has really pretty rigid guidelines about that, whether they're spoken or unspoken.
Mm-hmm.
Understood.
Even to your colleagues, you can't say things.
Right.
Like,
absolutely.
Oh, what happened? Oh, Joe got ransomware.
Right.
You can't say that at all.
Oh,
right.
That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Yeah. Having parts of your entire company that you wouldn't be able to tell things about. Okay. Yeah, there's an incident. We know that it's happening, but you can't tell X group because that would be very complicated. I would imagine.
Yeah. That communication has to come from above, like an official email to employees or whatnot.
Right.
Yeah. And matter of fact, many years ago, we actually had a designated room where if we did have a situation, we would go to that room. So we would be separated from all the other employees. So they couldn't walk by and see our notes on the wall or whatever, or hear us talking about IP addresses or certain other employees. So when there was an incident, we basically had a conference room and we had it reserved for that purpose, and everybody else would be kicked out, right? So and then we would have the proper network access and all that stuff. So there was a plan. Whenever there was an incident, we'd go to that room so that things couldn't leak out inadvertently.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. Kathy, do you have something similar to that at uni there, or
well,
I mean,
not
obviously
really.
things have gotten weirder with Zoom and whatever, using virtual stuff, but
so a couple of things. The security office has its own space, and we have our own conference room, and so frequently those conversations, if they need to take place, will take place in our conference room, sort of separate from the rest of the folks who are doing the other things. But I also, at one point, I worked for a government contractor, and we literally had a room that was meant for those kinds of conversations, because conversations that involve clearance and secret clearance, of which I did not have, but the same kinds of conversations that went on in that room, we also used for any kind of incident management, because it was completely soundproof, and the network was completely independent of the rest of the space. And, so I've kind of done both, but certainly we don't have those conversations in places where other people could just walk in and listen.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense to have those rooms, or to, not notify the entire company there's an issue, or to keep everybody in the loop, because, you may have somebody who would leak something that's a half truth, or something not, evidence as a fact, and further muddy the waters. We've seen it on Twitter, or on social media, where somebody was like, oh yeah, I heard it was this. And it's like, you had to have somebody come back and refute and say, no, actually it wasn't that. But by then the damage is done, and now you have conflicting issues there, which could cause, further legal issues. So I guess it's from a legal point of view, the need to know is a necessary deal. So
Yeah,
I can
absolutely.
understand that. Okay. Let me see. Any other discussions here? I did want to ask about, in higher ed, are you beholden to different disclosure requirements than businesses? I guess part of that would be, I think we talked a little bit about that, but I mean, do you have any kind of compliance requirement to disclose? I obviously, like breach notifications, I would imagine, but do you have different things that you're beholden to for that?
So not really. With FERPA, which is the regulatory piece that governs student data, there's definitely supposed to be notification about that, but it's not like credit cards or social security numbers. And really, social security numbers are the big issue, right? And most
Right.
of the regulatory stuff is governed by the state of New York. So we don't have anything special in higher ed in terms of legal requirements that other orgs don't, but we certainly have a focus on things like social security numbers, passports, driver's licenses, because that's the data we need to be able to, hire people like other orgs, bring students in on campus. We transitioned many years ago now, but social security numbers were used for everything. You register for a course, you use your social, and grades were posted by social security number. I mean, that was just the way it was done, right? They were
Right.
they were out public, and when that changed, that required everybody get some sort of special ID, and there was even a time. So I mentioned, my father was in computing. Well, he ran the computing center at the college in the town where I grew up for 41 years. And one of my very early usernames that I had on his mainframe had part of my social security number in it. I mean, that was, again, it was
wow.
the identifier. So a lot of that has changed. And it's changed in part because of the regulations that are kind of everywhere else. So I don't know that we have anything special. It's just that, we have FERPA regulation, which you wouldn't see in places that don't have students, because that is specific to students. But otherwise, all the regulations are the state and federal, the same things.
Are you beholden to international standards? I mean, you must have international students potentially coming in. I mean, do you have to, do GDPR or anything like that for them?
So yes and no. Legal. So we're part of a larger, our individual universities are part of the larger State University of New York system. And the State University of New York legal counsel has come out and said, here are the things you do with regard to GDPR. And they're very specific. So I would say, yes, we absolutely, are beholden to international laws, but the data we hold typically is more business centric and less personal data for the sake of holding personal data, which is really what the GDPR rules are about. We don't hold data, or at least we try not to hold data we don't need. That's what most organizations should be doing.
Right.
But we have very specific guidelines about what we have to do with regard to GDPR and other things. Certainly we have students from California, even right in this country, right? So you have other states. New York State has its own laws, California, and we're beholden to any law that is applicable, I think, is the best way I can state it. They're just different depending on the kind of data we're holding and why we're holding it.
That makes sense. Okay. All right, Mr. Betcher, do you have any other questions for Kathy?
I don't think so.
Okay. Cool. So, Kathy, if people wanted to talk to you about incident response, items or communication in particular, how would they find you?
Lots of ways to find me. I'm Investigator Chi, CHI, on Twitter, only because Investigator Chick, which is my normal handle, which is Investigator CHIC, was one letter too long. So, so I'm on Twitter. You can find me under my full name on LinkedIn. I'm out there. I'm involved with lots of conferences. So, my information's out there. I'm pretty easy to track down.
Right. Before we got started, this show, part one at least, is going to come out or came out the weekend of B-Sides Rochester, New York, which Kathy's one of the organizers of. And today, the 7th of March, we were talking about CircleCityCon, I think earlier in the week. And I'd just like to say congratulations. You're going to be speaking there on this topic. There's going to be some additional examples and stuff. But if anybody is interested, definitely go grab a ticket for CircleCityCon so that you can listen to Kathy talk about incident response items and communication. You said B-Sides Rochester before we started recording. B-Sides Rochester did go on. I hope it did go on, but what kind of talks do you have been given there or are being given there? I hate this verb thing. Tense and past tense.
So B-Sides, we're a very student focused conference, which means that we try to get very diverse topics because our students, we need them to be exposed to lots of different kinds of things. So, we'll accept lots of variety, I think is the best way, I can say it. So whether it's entry level talks about, here's my experience, becoming a red teamer for the first time. We have students that participate in CCDC and CPTC. And if you're not familiar with those are the collegiate pen test and the collegiate defense competitions, cyber defense competitions. And so there are folks who are both defending and doing offensive security. And so there's a wide swath of interest. So we really try to get, everything. This year we've had talks about OSINT. We had training about OSINT. We had training about Splunk and doing investigations with Splunk. So really the gamut. We try to get a little bit of everything when we can.
Awesome. Okay, excellent. Hope everybody enjoyed B-Sides Rochester. If you didn't get to check that out, mark it down in your calendar. Is it the same time every year?
It's usually in March, and ideally 2022, we're going to be back in person at the RIT Inn. That is we were supposed to have our big 10th anniversary in 2019. And of course, in 2020, but of course in 2020, we had no conference because of COVID. So we're going to, we had this virtual event, we called it B-Sides Virtual Edition, but we're really going to try for our 10th anniversary in 2022. It should be in March. I don't have hard dates yet because some of it will depend on the hotel/inn and RIT. Because of our relationship with RIT, we try to schedule it at a time when the students aren't, in the throes of exams or busy with open house or whatever.
Right. Okay. Yeah. The early time of year here, is killing folks. Even in June and July, I saw B-Sides Las Vegas is going fully virtual again this year. So there's going to be much opportunity to gain access to B-Sides Las Vegas virtually. But yeah, there's a ton of conferences are still, at least the ones that later in the year, in October, November, December timeframe, are still trying to figure out whether or not they're going to try to do an in-person thing or if they're going to try to go virtual. So I'm sure those will all shake out, including our own InfoSec campout. I think we talked about this. It's we will have a virtual component, but we're going to try maybe a limited deal at the end of August if we can do it. We'll have more information as well about ours. So you can follow on Twitter, InfoSec Campout, all one word. And, but yeah, so Catherine, thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate it. I don't think we have enough incident response talks on the show. I know Miss Berlin, Mr. Betcher, they love themselves some blue team and some IR and some digital forensics discussions. And if you ever want to come back on again to talk about something other than communications, we'd love to have you, because, incident response is, people are like, oh, it's just incidents and stuff, but there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of need to understand those things, because, I've worked maybe a handful of them in about 20 years, but every time I do it, it's like new every time I do it. And if you're not used to doing them, you learn something every time, but then you get out of practice. So it's good to at least have people who are, having to do them, talk about it and be able to share their experiences. So I appreciate that.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on. This has been a lot of fun. I absolutely would be delighted to come back and talk about some other things in the IR space or forensics. I'm working on another talk. I'm trying to come up with some entry-level ideas. Or what I guess I would call more foundational ideas, because we have folks that get into this space early on as maybe a SOC analyst and or even just they're in a space where they're a sysadmin or they're doing help desk and they want to make the transition. And I get asked all the time, what do I need to know to make that transition to blue team?
Right.
And my answer is, well, it depends. And of course, everybody hates that answer. But realistically, it's going to depend on the environment you go into and how big it is, right? Do you need to know all the different levels? Do you need to know pieces of it? But there are some foundational skills that I think that are very helpful in making that transition. So I'm going to try to put some talks together that cover some of those foundational skills, where if you're working in that other sector, if you're trying to make that jump, it's not just about certifications. It's not just about getting, your feet wet in a different job. It's, how can you do these things in the job you have to learn more about that space?
Right. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I would love to have that show come on. And when you're ready to do that show, don't hesitate to reach out, because we talk about breaking in and being pen testers all the time, and everybody's like, oh, it's so sexy to be pen tester and whatever. It's not. People who say that are not actually pen testers, I think. It's you get cracking shells in an environment all the time every day is not fun. And incident response is well, I wouldn't say it's fun, but it's challenging, and it's understanding how to be one and how to be one good very well is important. So yeah, when you're ready to give that talk, reach out, please, because I'd love to have you back.
By all means. And I have friends on both sides of the fence, and I think it's important to understand both sides. I actually wound up in this community because I wanted to understand more about pen testing and red teaming and what attackers do, because I can't be a good defender without understanding those things. Yep. But I had to have foundational knowledge to even get as far as I did. So I think it's all really important. And I think it definitely takes a certain mindset to be in, the defense space, because it's constant. Some days you don't feel like you're ever going to get a win, even when you do. And, getting into it, whether it's red or blue, just for the sexy nature of it, I think doesn't make you a long-term possibility, right? You're going to burn out fast. But if you really enjoy learning and growing. And I mean, that's how, you asked me at the very beginning, right? How did I wind up here? Well, at the end of the day, it was because I wanted to understand more. I wanted to understand the bigger picture. And the only way you do that is to keep learning.
Very nice. Very nice. Cool. Yes. Yes, absolutely. And very nice. So yeah. So we can end the show, Mr. Betcher, you have a forensic tool or a logging tool that you are working on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about LogMD?
Yeah, an incident response tool.
Yeah.
Its primary function is to get you started on logging in a Windows environment. And where do you start? What do you start logging, right? And so that helps you along the way be able to log the right things in a Windows environment. And then it just goes on from there, however you want to use it. You can get into registry. You can get into, let's see, what else does it have? Memory. Let's see, processes, all kinds of things, right? But it primarily starts with the logging, and if you don't know how to start, it's a good start. It's a good place.
Nice. And how would people find that if they were looking for that?
The website is log-md.com.
Cool. Okay. And our mutual friend, Michael Goff, he's speaking somewhere in the near future, isn't he?
I can imagine he would be.
Yeah. Yeah. He does a lot of blue team and discussion on logging and stuff. I want to say I saw a tweet or something where he was going to be speaking in like Tulsa or something like that, but I could be wrong. So just keep an eye out. If you see him, speaking at a conference, know that you're going to get some good information there. So cool. All right. Ms. Berlin, she's doing a lot. She's got her detect and defense tabletop incident response tabletop system that she's doing with her friend there. I want to say Jeremy. It could be wrong. Shoot me, Ms. Berlin, if I'm wrong. You can find out about all of her workshops and everything. You can follow her on Twitter at InfoSystir, INFOSYSTIR. She also does mental health hackers, which is trying to bring awareness to InfoSec space and security and IT space about mental health issues. They're doing some regular discussions. They have a Slack, I believe, for discussion. If you want to go on there, reach out to her and you can get that information. And INFOSYSTIR on Twitter, and you can find her there. And you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Brian Brake, BRYANBRAKE, and the podcast is BrakeSec, BRAKESEC on Twitter. We have a Slack, which is very active. We actually have an incident response and digital forensics channel in addition to our blue team channel, where we post things like tools that help in incident responses or gathering analytics. Actually, I think I found one today that was you could analyze your Kubernetes environment to set up things like better logging or what have you. So posted some links in that channel for that. You can we're invite only, but we don't stop anybody from coming in unless they're a bot. You can email bds.podcast@gmail.com or send us a DM on Twitter to BrakeSec, and we'll get on there. So we have a Patreon. We'd like to thank all of our patron sponsors for their support to the show. The podcast is always free, but their monetary support helps for hosting fees, Zoom, time and effort of just, building and maintaining community and getting the podcast out on a regular basis. I'd like to thank Jeff T. He became a sponsor on March 7th. He is doing what he can to help support the podcast, and we appreciate his help doing so. Let me see. TPub store, if you want to get a t-shirt, some masks, help out small business or what have you, you can go to brakesec.com/store. You can get, some vintage stuff from our InfoSec Campout 2019 shop. Everything's really good quality. The t-shirts, they have unisex and female cut t-shirts, coffee cups. The masks are really nice too. I actually sent some of those out to some friends of ours on the show, and and yeah, they really enjoyed them. So you can go and check that out. We actually get a little kickback to the show if you buy some stuff there, and you're also helping out small business who may need that business, especially in the times of pandemic. So I think that's everything. So Catherine, thank you for coming. We, very, very much enjoy hearing leaders talk about incident response and important things that don't hear a lot about on other podcasts. So it's good to have you join us.
Again, my pleasure. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to doing it again in the future.
Right on. All right. Well, that was it for Breaking Down Security this week. Have a great week. Be kind to one another. If the temperature gets above 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius, get outside. Try to get out, take a walk. Winter's hopefully done for you, and get out and get a little sun. So take care of yourselves because you're the only you have, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.